Hello everyone, welcome to EPG Pathshala. In this module, we'll briefly discuss about multilingualism in India. India is often been called as a multilingual giant, and it's not just India but almost all linguistic communities have been multilingual at some point of time. Linguistic variability, whether in terms of different styles or different languages, is indeed constitutive of being human. We'll come back to this point in the next modules. Indian multilingualism has been seen as an object of wonder, is an artifact created by our colonial masters, among whom the dominant language was English. As they moved from one state to another or one province to another, it was difficult for them to converse with the locals. So they found it really difficult to communicate with the local Indians in their languages. According to Pandit, variability in linguistic behavior in India is not a barrier but a facilitator in communication. Unless there are major geographical boundaries such as mountains or oceans, people across villages, towns, states and countries don't stop talking to each other. In spite of having different linguistic, ethnic and national identities, they find a way to come closer and communicate to each other. The Indian subcontinent is still unique in some way, even though it has a lot of languages and different cultures. Perhaps it is the only part of the world that is home to 5 different language families and has a very large number of languages and still constitutes a linguistic area. Now we'll discuss about the language families and languages in India. There are 4 major language families in India, namely Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, Austroasiatic and Tibeto-Burman. Recently a language family called Antamanese has been established. Most of the languages spoken in the northern, western and eastern parts of India like Hindi, Marathi, Punjabi, Bangla, etc. are Indo-Aryan. Whereas most languages spoken in the south, including Tamil, Malayalam, Kannada and Telugu, belong to Dravidian family of languages. There's a belt that cuts across central and eastern India that speaks Munda languages such as Santali, Ho, Mundari and Kurku. The Tibeto-Burman languages like Manipuri, Angami and Aur are spoken in the northeastern part of India. According to the 1971 census, India has a total of 1652 languages belonging to different language families. In this census, languages such as Bhojpuri, Maithili, etc. were counted as separate languages and they were not just considered as a dialectal varieties of Hindi or any other language. So in India, over 87 languages are used in print media, 71 languages are used in radio, and for the administrative purposes in the country, we use around 13 different languages. In spite of having this huge linguistic diversities, India constitutes a linguistic area. So it is indeed surprising that languages belonging to so many different language families share common features at the level of structure. This is simply due to sustained contact over centuries. Such a contact is made possible through migration and other religious and cultural purposes. So people travel from one place to another for different purposes, and in the course of that journey they have to communicate with other people of speaking different languages. As Subbarao suggested, in the South Asian subcontinent, languages belonging to different genetic groups exhibit common structural traits largely due to 2 main reasons. The first reason is that thousands of years of prolonged language contact among languages due to intense bilingualism and multilingualism. And the second reason is that due to the fact that all these languages except Khasi and Kashmiri are verb final. So almost all Indian languages are have the SOV word order, that is subject, object, verb, word order, whereas Khasi and Kashmiri have SVO word order, that is subject, verb and object. The position of verb in terms of verb finality or non-verb finality plays an instrumental role in the manifestation of many identical structural traits. In 1956, MNU, in his landmark paper titled India as a Linguistic Area, laid the groundwork for the general acceptance of the concept of a linguistic area. He suggested that the Dravidian and Indo-Aryan languages of India shared a large number of features that were not inherited from a common source. So even though the languages belonging to Indo-Aryan and Dravidian languages have huge differences in terms of sound and other structures, it has a lot of common features which are not inherited from a common source. Such shared features, however, were the result of sustained contact and diffusion. Several studies followed in this domain of investigation showed how divergent cultures and linguistic patterns of Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, Tibeto-Burman and Munda languages, language families had merged to constitute an integrated whole that defined Indianness. So we will now discuss some of such shared features. One of many such features is verb finality. As I have already mentioned, most of the Indian languages except Kashmiri and Khasi have SOV word order. And Kashmiri and Khasi are verb medial languages. In all these languages, the auxiliary follows the main verb. For example, in the case of English, which has SVO word order, the auxiliary precedes the main verb. Let's look into an example. In the sentence, Ram is eating food, the auxiliary is precedes the main verb eating. Whereas in the Hindi translation of the same sentence, Ram khana kha raha hai, the auxiliary follows the main verb. Now let's try to make the negatives of these sentences. So first, in English it will be Ram is not eating food, and in Hindi it is Ram khana nahi kha raha hai. In both the languages, it is a verbal complex which attracts the negative. But in English, the negative note is close to the auxiliary is. It can't actually go anywhere else. So Ram is not eating food. The negative note is very close to the auxiliary is. Whereas in Hindi, the negation nahi appears before the main verb. So in the sentence Ram khana nahi kha raha hai, the negation comes first and then comes the auxiliary. Another structural feature that binds Indian languages together is that they have postpositions rather than prepositions. In English, we say on the table, in the room, under the table, all that phrases, and on, in and under are seen as prepositions. Whereas in Hindi and other SOV languages, we have postpositions as in मेज पर, kamre में, मेज के नीचे. So in English, prepositions appear before noun, and in Hindi, the locative markers appear after the noun. We may also talk about the order of indirect object and direct object in a sentence. In the sentence, Ram gave a book to Homna. Book is a direct object and Homna is the indirect object. In SVO languages, direct object precedes indirect object. On the contrary, in Hindi and other SOV languages, indirect object precedes direct object. So, for example, let's look at this Hindi sentence, Ram ne Homna ko kitab di. So, here the indirect object Homna comes before the direct object kitab. Now let's look up the case of comparative and superlative construction in Indian languages. In English, one would, for example, say taller than Mohan. That is, you use than to mark the standard of comparison, which comes before Mohan. Indian languages lack comparative and superlative markers like taller, tallest. The EREST markers are absent in Indian languages. And in most Indian languages, what happens is the marker of comparison follows the standard of comparison. As observed, the order within the adverbial phrases of time and place also show the mirror image effect. So, in Indian languages, we have noticed the descending order, and by descending order, we mean the superordinate chunk of place or time occurs first, and then a subordinate chunk, and then a chunk subordinate to that follows. So, for example, in the sentence, शिखा रिचा से दिल्ली में स्कूल के कैंटीन के पास वाले कमरे के दरवाज़ा पर मिली. So, here what happens is, Delhi comes first, followed by increasing smaller chunks such as school, canteen, room and door. Whereas in the English translation of the same sentence, Shikha met Richa at the door of the room next to the canteen in the school in Delhi. What comes first is door. Okay, the subordinate chunk comes first and the superordinate chunk Delhi comes last. Now let's discuss the adverbials of time. Adverbials of time, which it also behaves like adverbials of place. In Hindi, the largest chunk will come first, and in English, it would come last. So now let's look into this example. Where were you around 8 p.m. on 31st of December last year? So here in this sentence, last year appears at the end of the sentence, whereas in Hindi, the sentence starts with pichle saal. Now let's look at the WH questions formations. In English, if you wish to make a WH question with what, where, when and how, all these words would appear in the beginning of the question. But that's not exactly the case with Indian languages. The question words do not necessarily appear in the beginning of the sentence, it appears somewhere else, maybe in the middle of the sentence. So now let's look at these examples of English. Who ate an apple? What did Sita eat? Where did Sita eat the apple? At what time did Sita eat? So in all these examples, the question word what, when, where, how, it comes in the beginning of the sentence. Now the Hindi translations of this question would be like किसने सेब खाया और सुधा ने कहाँ 8 बजे. It goes on like that. So the question words कहाँ, कब, or all these question words comes in the middle of the sentence and not necessarily in the beginning of the sentence. Another important feature that almost all Indian languages share is that of complete reduplication. So that is, you can take any word X and make it XX. You can just reduplicate it. In English, it's reduplication does not normally happen, but in Hindi and other Indian languages, it's very common to reduplicate a word. And you can reduplicate almost any word for emphasis and distributive purpose. So when we reduplicate a word, it is for either for emphasis or for distributive purpose. So ghar alone means house, and when we reduplicate it, ghar, it means every house. Another important feature of Indian languages is partial reduplication, and it gives the meaning of etc. So, like we said earlier, ghar means house and ghar means every house. But when we in partial reduplication, mostly it is only the first syllable that get reduplicated, and here in case of ghar, when it's partially reduplicated, it becomes gharvar, and that means house, etc. Or let's take another example of chai. When we reduplicate, in partial reduplication of chai, it becomes chai vai, and chai vai means chai, etc., or chai and other snacks which goes along with chai. So in Hindi, the first consonantal sound is consistently replaced by sound va, as in gharvar, chai vai, etc. These are some of the many features Indian languages share. In spite of its remarkable diversity, India remains as a linguistic area because of all these features. So now we have already mentioned a lot of features that are shared across Indian languages. Now we look into the constitutional provisions of languages. The members of Constituent Assembly also had a hard time in giving suitable place to different languages in the Indian Constitution, so that all the interested linguistic and cultural groups could be satisfied. The multiplicity of languages in country and the important role played by English in the administration, judiciary, education and media cannot be washed away. It was clear that if India were to have a participatory democracy, the language question would prove to be highly contested. So, languages like Sanskrit, Tamil, Telugu and Bengali, and most of all Hindi asserted for a strong presence in constitution and the country. Article 343 of the Constitution of India states Hindi as the official language, and it's important to note that nowhere in the Constitution is said that Hindi is a national language of India. Article 343 of the Constitution of India states Hindi as the official language of the Union, and it is really important to note that nowhere in the Indian Constitution is it said that is Hindi stated as a national language. It is stated as an official language of the Union and allows English to continue for all official purposes. According to Article 343(2), the Constitution provides for the use of English for all official purposes for a period of 15 years. However, by 1965, widespread riots in South India and the fears of domination of Hindi and Aryanization made it clear that English should not be completely demoted from its official status. It was given the status of associate official language in 1965. The Constitution states that English will be the language of High Court, Supreme Court and Acts of Parliament. The Constitution also provides for the rights of its citizens to make representation in any language to the state. So, in this module, we tried to briefly introduce different aspects of multilingualism in India, and we also noticed that in spite of having 5 different language families, that is Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, Tibeto-Burman and Austroasiatic, in spite of having these different language families, and hundreds of languages, India still constitutes a linguistic area, and it was Emmanuel who first called India as a linguistic area. There are several structural features such as SOV order, postpositions, structure of time and place adverbials, full and partial reduplication, among others, that are shared by several Indian languages, irrespective of which family the language may belong to. So, we have already mentioned these features in detail, so I'll repeat once again. In Indian languages, we have certain features in common, and some of those features are most of the languages except for Khasi and Kashmiri have SOV word order, and Indian languages have postpositions instead of prepositions, and it also allows partial and full reduplication. We also briefly discussed the constitutional provisions of for languages in India, and it is very clearly stated that uh, Hindi and English will serve as an official language, and uh, the constitution also provides for the right of its citizens to make a representation in any language to the state. Thank you.